Built in 1913 as the first and one of the only vaudeville houses on Broadway, playing the Palace became the goal of every singer, dancer, and actor in America.
What is the mystique of the Palace?
My dream was always to play the Palace. Like the song goes, unless you play the Palace, you are nowhere.
You know, Broadway. It doesn't get more Broadway than the Palace. Let's put it that way.
The Palace was the dream house of vaudeville impresario Martin Beck, who hired Kirchhoff Rose, successful Milwaukee-based architects, to design a lavish Beaux-Arts theater.
The Palace Theater is not about its exterior. You don't see the exterior. There are advertising billboards on the facade. It's an enormous theater. When it was originally designed, it had 2 balconies and an extensive array of private boxes because vaudeville audiences loved sitting in the boxes.
From the turn of the 20th century until the 1930s, vaudeville was the most popular form of entertainment in America. Vaudeville shows, comprised of multiple acts of comedy, song, and dance, traveled from town to town.
Shows went on all day, so people were moving in and out of the theater all the time, so a large lobby was absolutely necessary for a theater like this.
Shortly after the Palace opened, Martin Beck lost control of the theater to his arch rivals E.F. Albee and B.F. Keith. Over the next 20 years, the Palace became a vaudeville mecca, with headliners like Sarah Bernhardt, Harry Houdini, and Will Rogers.
The Palace was the place where people wanted to work. And if you worked the Palace, it meant you were at the top of your game in vaudeville. With the late 1920s, talking pictures were on the rise, and the Palace became a movie house.
In 1965, the fate of the Palace Theater changed again when Jimmy Nederlander Sr. came to New York.
So I came to New York and bought the Palace Theater. Well, we remodeled it by, fixing it up. It was an old movie house.
The Palace was renovated by architect and renowned scenic designer Ralph Alswang.
And we opened the theater that time with Sweet Charity with Gwen Verdon. It was a hit, immediate hit. I got lucky.
Building on the tradition of the past, the Palace flourished with a combination of hit musicals and superstar concerts, beginning in 1967 with Judy Garland.
Judy, great performer, that lady. She had a way of capturing their hearts.
You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag.
I played the Palace as George M. Cohan, the hardest show I ever had to do. I wasn't a tapper before, and I had to play the greatest tap dancer in the American theater. We ran for over a year. There was not a night that I didn't go downstairs under the stage and practice my solo right before the show.
Over the next several decades, the legacy of attracting legendary stars continued at the Palace, including Lauren Bacall in Applause. Her role was later taken over by Arlene Dahl.
Playing the Palace was one of the highlights of my career. I couldn't wait to see the dressing rooms that other stars had used. I couldn't wait to go up in that elevator and hear those voices, to hear the laughter from Olson and Johnson and Eddie Cantor, and to hear the songs of Sophie Tucker. I thought this is where I was meant to be.
In 1983, a musical about a Parisian nightclub that featured drag queens came to the Palace, La Cage aux Folles.
It was a whirlwind. I mean, we basically wrote La Cage in 3 months. I'm this kid from Brooklyn. I was not a wealthy kid. I was a very poor kid. And I walked into Alan Carr's apartment, which was the penthouse of the San Moritz Hotel. And he handed me 4 dozen roses and a check for $10,000 and said, would you write this? You know, it was sort of amazing.
In 1991, the Will Rogers Follies came to the Palace, directed and choreographed by Tommy Tune.
For me, the Will Rogers Follies belonged in the Palace Theater because Will Rogers was a Ziegfeld star, and the Palace Theater looks like a theater where Ziegfeld would have put on his Follies. If you put the right show in the wrong theater, it will hurt it. I got the Palace, and it really made the show.
To this day, the mystique of the Palace lives on.
You haven't lived until you've played the Palace.